The ceasefire was announced. The ships are not moving. Those two facts are both in the documented record. The distance between them is the story.
The ceasefire was announced on April 7th. The president called it one of the most significant diplomatic achievements of his presidency. The Strait of Hormuz, he said, would open immediately, completely, safely, and without limitation. 3 days later, the Strait of Hormuz is not open, not in any meaningful sense. According to ship tracking data published by Kpler and Lloyd's List Intelligence, more than 600 vessels, including 325 oil tankers, remain stranded inside the Persian Gulf. The pre-war average was more than 100 vessels transiting the strait daily. As of Thursday, April 10th, the number of ships that have actually passed through since the ceasefire announcement is in the single digits per day. According to Al Jazeera's reporting, citing Kpler data, 5 vessels crossed the strait on Wednesday and 7 on Thursday. Against a pre-war daily average of over 100, that is approximately 8% of normal traffic. The CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, Sultan Al Jaber, one of the most consequential voices in global energy markets, said publicly on April 9th that the strait was still not open, despite the ceasefire, because Iran is restricting and conditioning traffic. He said 230 loaded oil tankers were waiting inside the Gulf. That statement was not made by an Iranian official, an American analyst, or a critic of any government.
Complete, immediate, and safe opening. That was the condition. Coordination with Iran's armed forces, with due consideration of technical limitations.
It was made by the head of one of the world's largest state oil companies, whose economy depends directly on the waterway being open. That gap between what was announced and what the ship tracking data shows is what this brief examines. This is Stratford Brief. Let's get into it. Let me establish the factual sequence with precision, because the specific timeline of statements against the specific timeline of events is the argument. On April 7th, the president announced a 2-week ceasefire on Truth Social. The condition he stated was, in capital letters, the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz.
The IRGC said the strait will never return to its permanent was not walked status. That statement was previous status.
The White House press secretary clarified the following morning that the president's demand was the strait be reopened without any limitations, including tolls. The Iranian foreign minister's response to the ceasefire announcement was specific. Safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible via coordination with Iran's armed forces and with due consideration of technical limitations. I want to stay with those two descriptions for a moment because they are not the same statement. Complete, immediate, and safe opening without any limitations is one condition. Coordination with Iran's armed forces with due consideration of technical limitations is a different condition.
Iran arrived at Islamabad with a specific institutional memory. The last time they were negotiating with this administration,
the first describes a strait that operates as it did before February 28th. The second describes a strait where Iranian military authority governs which vessels transit, when, and under what terms. Those are two categorically different operational conditions being described as though they are the same agreement. On April 8th, the Iranian Navy released a map. According to NBC News reporting, the map outlined designated shipping lanes that vessels should use to transit safely, directing outbound ships along a route just south of Larak Island and inbound vessels along a route north of the island. Both routes are closer to Iran's mainland than the lanes used before the war. The same NBC News reporting noted that shipping executives, including the head of Flexport, a leading global shipping logistics company, stated publicly that they had no information about how to transit the strait during the ceasefire and were not in contact with Iranian authorities. On April 10th, the IRGC Navy made a statement that the Strait of Hormuz will never return to its previous status.
The Suez Canal was closed for 6 months in 1956. Political resolution came quickly, traffic took months more to normalize.
That statement, carried by Iran's semi-official ISNA news agency and reported by the Dupree Report, was not walked back. The White House had not formally responded to it as of this recording. Before we continue, subscribe to Stratford Brief and turn on notifications. Every development in the Islamabad negotiations, every ship tracking update, every official statement that contradicts a previous one, we cover it with the same methodology. what was said, what the documented record shows, and what the gap between those two things means. New brief every day. Let's continue. The official position from Washington, as presented by the President and repeated by administration officials, is that the ceasefire represents a complete American victory. In an interview with NBC News, the President said Iran's leaders were much more reasonable in private discussions, that they were agreeing to all the things they had to agree to, and added, "Remember, they have been conquered. They have no military." That characterization needs to be examined against the documented record of what is actually happening in the Strait, because the distance between those two descriptions is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of ship tracking data. If Iran has been conquered and has no military, the operational question is why the world's major shipping companies are still refusing to transit the Strait. The answer, drawn from statements made by shipping executives to CNN, CNBC, NBC News, and Al Jazeera, is consistent across all of them. They do not know who to ask for permission, they have received no assurances from Iranian authorities, and the mind map published by the Iranian Navy has made the transit question more complicated, not less.
3 questions from Islamabad matter more than anything else being said there. Does the agreement include a published transit protocol?
Ron Widows, the former head of the World Shipping Council, described the situation to NBC News in precise terms. Shippers want explicit approval from the people that may do you harm. Jakob Larsson, Chief Safety and Security Officer at BIMCO, the leading global organization for ship owners and charterers, told NBC News the industry was awaiting technical details from the U.S. and from Iran on how to transit the Strait of Hormuz safely. The Deputy Foreign Minister of Iran told ITV News that vessels should be very careful about security and safety. None of these statements describe a strait that has been reopened completely, immediately, and safely. Now let me examine the Lebanon dimension, because it is the second documented reason the ceasefire is already showing fractures.
The indicator is not the statement from the room, it is the ship tracking data the following morning. 600 vessels are waiting.
And because the pattern it reveals about how this ceasefire was constructed tells you something analytically important about the Islamabad negotiations that begin today. According to the Wikipedia documentation of the April 8th Lebanon attacks, Israel launched approximately 100 airstrikes on densely populated areas of Lebanon, including Beirut, within hours of the ceasefire announcement. Lebanon's health ministry reported hundreds killed or wounded. The Israeli military called the operation Operation Eternal Darkness and said it targeted only Hezbollah. International observers described the attacks as occurring in civilian areas with limited actual military gains. The ceasefire mediator, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, said publicly that the ceasefire included Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu said publicly that it did not. The American government remained silent on the contradiction. Iran's foreign minister accused the United States of not honoring the deal and warned it had to choose between a ceasefire or continued war via its ally. Iran halted tanker traffic through the strait following the Lebanon strikes, according to Iranian state media, before partially resuming it. The analytical observation here is specific. The ceasefire was presented as a bilateral agreement between the United States and Iran. Within 24 hours of its announcement, a third party whose actions are directly relevant to Iran's compliance with the Strait conditions, Israel, had taken military action that Iran cited as a breach. The United States did not formally address whether Israel's actions in Lebanon were compatible with the ceasefire terms. That silence is itself a documented fact. What it tells you about the structure of the agreement, specifically about whether the parties share a common understanding of what was agreed, is the analytically significant question. Now let me examine the Islamabad negotiations specifically, because the documented record of who is attending and what Iran's stated position going in actually says, tells you something about the distance the two sides need to travel. According to ABC News reporting confirmed today, April 10th, the Vice President is leading the American delegation to Islamabad, accompanied by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. The delegation has departed Joint Base Andrews as of this morning. According to Al Jazeera's reporting on the composition and context of the talks, Iranian officials are specifically skeptical about Witkoff and Kushner, citing the fact that negotiations with them in Muscat and Geneva in February were ongoing at the exact moment the United States began bombing Iran on February 28th. They view the vice president as more open to ending the conflict. The significance of that context is specific. Iran is arriving at Islamabad with an institutional memory that the last time direct negotiations were underway, those negotiations were used by the other side as cover for the initiation of military operations. That memory shapes how Iran reads every American commitment made in the room. Iran's stated position going into Islamabad is its 10-point proposal. According to the New York Times reporting, confirmed by Reuters and IRNA, the known elements include guarantees Iran will not be attacked again, lifting of all sanctions, an end to Israeli strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and recognition of Iran's right to enrich uranium. In addition, the Iranian Supreme National Security Council's statement following the ceasefire claimed the United States had in principle agreed to withdraw combat forces from the region and accept Iranian nuclear enrichment. The American government has not confirmed or denied those specific claims. The American position going in, based on the president's public statements, includes the complete and permanent reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, denuclearization of Iran, and some form of regional security framework. Those two sets of opening positions are not close to each other. Islamabad is the beginning of a negotiation, not the formalization of an agreement. The financial dimension of the ceasefire's current incompletion is worth documenting specifically because the market signal the past 3 days has provided is different from the signal the ceasefire announcement initially produced. When the ceasefire was announced on April 7th, S&P 500 futures rose more than 1%, and oil futures dropped approximately 6% immediately, according to Axios reporting. Those movements reflected the market's assessment that the Strait of Hormuz would open and global energy flows would normalize. 3 days later, that assessment has been partially walked back. According to the Al Jazeera economic analysis, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company CEO's statement that the strait was still closed and conditioned reinforced what ship tracking data was already showing. The energy disruption that has been running since February 28th is not over. The EIA projection, published before the ceasefire, but not superseded by it, remains operative. Full restoration of Hormuz energy flows will take months even after a genuine resolution, and production will not return to near pre-conflict levels until late 2026. The economic cost that was already accumulating, oil above $100 per barrel, American gas prices above $4 per gallon, 7.5 million barrels per day of Gulf production shut in, does not reverse on the timeline of a diplomatic announcement. It reverses on the timeline of ships actually moving. And as of April 10th, ships are not moving through the strait at anything close to normal volume. The historical parallel that the current situation most directly invokes is not a conflict precedent. It is a logistics precedent. The Suez Crisis of 1956. The canal was closed for months following the Egyptian nationalization and the subsequent Anglo-French-Israeli military intervention. The political resolution, which came quickly under American pressure, did not produce an immediate resumption of normal canal traffic. The infrastructure, the legal frameworks for transit, and the confidence of shipping companies had to be rebuilt over time, even after the political agreement was in place. The parallel is not about the politics of the two crises, which are structurally different. It is about the gap between political resolution and operational normalization. In 1956, the Suez Canal was closed for roughly 6 months. Traffic took additional months to return to pre-crisis levels after reopening. The Strait of Hormuz has been effectively closed for 40 days. The ship tracking data suggests that even a genuine political resolution in Islamabad will not produce immediate normalization of traffic. Because the confidence of shipping companies has to be rebuilt, the mind map has to be addressed, the coordination mechanism Iran is insisting on has to be clarified, and the 600 vessels currently stranded in the Gulf have to be processed through a waterway that Iran has now said will never return to its previous status. The question the Islamabad negotiations will answer, and the one that the documented record of the past 3 days has framed with specific precision, is whether the 2-week ceasefire window produces a framework that addresses the specific operational questions the shipping industry is asking, or whether it produces another political announcement that the ship tracking data then contradicts. The 3 indicators to watch from today's negotiations are specific. First, does the Islamabad agreement include an explicit published protocol for Hormuz transit? Who ships contact? What coordination means in practice? What the fee structure, if any, actually is? The current absence of that protocol is the primary reason ships are not moving. An agreement in Islamabad that does not address it will not move the ships. Second, does the Lebanon question get resolved in Islamabad, or does it remain the documented contradiction between what Pakistan said the ceasefire included and what Israel said it did not? Iran has made Lebanon a condition for sustained Hormuz access in its public statements. If Islamabad does not address Lebanon, the strand connecting Iran's Hormuz compliance to Israel's Lebanon operations remains intact, and Iran retains the ability to reclose the strait by citing Israeli actions as a breach at any point in the 2 weeks. Third, what does the vice president say publicly when he leaves Islamabad? The previous pattern of this conflict, the expired deadlines, the competing characterizations of what was agreed, has established that the official description of a diplomatic outcome is not always the same as the operational reality that follows it. What Islamabad produces on paper and what the ship tracking data shows in the following 48 hours will tell you which description holds. Based on what the full documented record shows, 600 vessels stranded, 8% of normal traffic moving, an Iranian Navy map that shipping executives describe as evidence of mines, an IRGC statement that the strait will never return to its previous status, a ceasefire that Lebanon's health ministry says produced 357 deaths in a single day of Israeli strikes, and a set of American and Iranian opening positions in Islamabad that are not close to each other. The picture that emerges is of a ceasefire that is real as a pause in aerial bombardment, and not yet real as the complete, immediate reopening of the world's most critical energy choke point.
The ceasefire is real. The pause in aerial strikes is real. What is not yet real is the thing the ceasefire was supposed to produce. 600 vessels are still waiting. The IRGC said the strait will never return to its previous status. The shipping companies say they have no protocol, no contact, no guarantee. And the delegations in Islamabad are working from opening positions that are not close to each other. A ceasefire that pauses bombs but does not move ships is not a resolution. It is an interval. What happens in that interval, Kpler, in Islamabad, in the Strait, in Lebanon, will determine whether this 2-week window becomes something permanent or becomes the 5th deadline in a conflict that has already produced 4. The mainstream coverage will tell you what was signed. This channel will tell you what the ship tracking data shows the morning after. That is the difference. Stay sharp.
The relief it produced in markets was real. The ships are still stuck. Both of those things are true. The distance between the first 2 and the 3rd is what the next 2 weeks will either close or confirm. Stratford Brief will be tracking every ship tracking update, every statement from Islamabad, and every gap between what is said and what the documented record shows. The mainstream coverage tells you what happened. Stratford Brief tells you what it means. New brief tomorrow. I'm James Caldwell. Stay sharp.